Hello and welcome. I'm Aiden, your narrator for tonight. Let's take this time together to step away from the rush of the day and ease into a world of dreams and wonder. Tonight, I'll tell you a story, one of ancient seas, quiet strength, and a journey that begins not with a sword, but with a longing. This is the tale of Jason and the Argonauts, not as you've heard it told in loud halls or sung in mighty epics, but as a soft voyage filled with starlight, silence, and the slow unfolding of courage. A story of a boy who chased the Golden Fleece and found peace instead of power. But before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? Is it late where you are, with the moon high and the house asleep? Or perhaps it's still evening, and you're stealing a quiet moment for yourself before the day truly ends? Let us know in the comments. We love imagining the little pockets of stillness where our stories find you. If you'd like even more from us, you can check out our Patreon for early access to all our stories and a special playlist to carry this calm with you. And if these bedtime stories have been a gentle pause in your nights, subscribing is the simplest way to support us. It means the world to us, and it helps us keep this space soft and sacred for dreamers like you. Now, take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. Let the tension in your shoulders melt, and let your thoughts drift like waves beneath the stars. The sails are ready, the sea is calm, and the stars above are waiting. So close your eyes and let us begin. The wind over Mount Pelion carried a chill, but young Jason hardly noticed it as he sat barefoot on the ledge of the hill, eyes turned upward to the stars. Every night, he came here to watch them, those tiny fires in the sky that never spoke, but always seemed to listen. He would whisper stories to them of kingdoms lost, of kings who forgot their hearts, and of a boy with only one sandal who would one day return home. Jason had lived most of his life under the watchful care of Chiron, the wise old centaur whose gentle voice and careful hooves taught him everything from the healing touch of herbs to the strength found in kindness. Chiron often told him, "You carry the storm and the stillness, Jason. Both will be needed." Jason didn't fully understand what that meant, but he remembered it. He remembered everything Chiron ever told him. It had been many seasons since Jason last saw Iolcus, the kingdom of his birth. His father, Aeson, had once ruled it with warmth and wisdom, until his own brother, Peleus, took the throne with cold ambition and the iron smile of a man who trusted no one. To protect Jason, Aeson had sent him away as an infant, down the river, wrapped in wool and sorrow. He was raised in the wild, but the blood of kings pulsed quietly within him. One morning, Chiron found Jason tracing constellations in the dirt with a stick. He was quiet, thoughtful. That was how Chiron knew the boy was ready. "It's time," the centaur said gently. Jason looked up. For what? To go home and to begin the dream you've always had. That night, the stars were especially bright. Jason couldn't sleep. He stood beneath the open sky and thought about the stories Chiron had told him, of distant lands, of brave hearts, of magical creatures and impossible tasks. But the story that stayed with him most was the one Chiron told only once, in a low and hushed tone. The tale of the Golden Fleece. A fleece spun from the wool of a sacred ram, gifted by the gods and hidden away in the distant kingdom of Colchis. It shimmered like sunlight on calm water, and was said to hold the power to heal the land, unite the broken, and crown the rightful king. The fleece doesn't choose the strongest, Chiron had said. It chooses the one whose heart is clear. Jason didn't know if his heart was clear, but he knew it was steady and quiet and ready. He packed little. Just a satchel of herbs from Chiron's garden, a soft linen tunic, and a small silver amulet shaped like a crescent moon, a gift from his mother, left with him in the cradle woven of reeds. When he reached the gates of Iolcus, the city did not recognize him. He walked barefoot, with only one sandal, having lost the other helping an old woman across a swollen stream. That old woman had smiled at him afterward with eyes that glowed faintly gold. "You will be known by what you give away," she had whispered, "not what you keep." Inside the city walls, rumors stirred of a boy with one sandal who had arrived to challenge the king. Peleus, now old and sharp-eyed, demanded the boy be brought before him. Jason stood calmly in the great hall, watching the torches flicker on marble walls that once belonged to his father. "I am Jason, son of Aeson," he said simply. The court went silent. Peleus narrowed his eyes and replied, almost too quietly, "If you wish to prove yourself, fetch me the Golden Fleece." Jason nodded, not as a boast, but as a promise. He would go, not for revenge, not for power, but to awaken something ancient and sleeping inside him. That night, he returned to the edge of the hill beneath Mount Pelion. The stars above sparkled like fireflies resting on velvet. "I'm going now," he whispered to the sky, but not alone. And as if in answer, the first breeze of dawn swept through the grass, carrying with it the faint scent of cedar and salt, the smell of a ship being built. Far away, the sea stirred, and the stars, ever watchful, leaned in to listen. The morning after Jason vowed to find the Golden Fleece, the sea welcomed him with a hush, like the breath drawn before a long lullaby. Along the coast where the cliffs met the waves, a ship waited, though it was not yet finished, and no hammer touched it. It was being shaped by enchantment, carved by wind, and guided by a voice older than memory. This ship was Argo, crafted from sacred wood, cut from the whispering trees of Dodona. The ship bore within it the quiet soul of the forest. Every plank was blessed, every nail smoothed with honey and song. The prow curved like a question mark, elegant and still, its wood cool to the touch, yet thrumming softly, like a heartbeat in sleep. The hull shone dark and golden, as if soaked in the last light of a fading star. And at its helm, carved into the very grain of the ship, was an eye, closed, yet listening. Jason stood before it, silent, hand pressed to the bow. He could feel it breathe. "She's waiting for your name," said Argus, the shipwright who had shaped her form but never claimed her soul. He was an old man with kind eyes and calloused hands. "She will not sail until you call her." Jason closed his eyes and whispered the name that had stirred in his dreams for years. Argo. The ship gave a quiet creak, then settled. The sea stilled. A breeze blew gently from the east. Word spread swiftly across the land. Jason was assembling a crew to sail beyond the edge of the known world. But he didn't seek warriors alone. He sought those with gentle hands and noble hearts, people who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. Soon they came. Heracles, strong as the mountains, but with laughter like thunderclouds after rain. Atalanta, a swift-footed huntress who spoke more to animals than men, with eyes that saw through lies. Orpheus, the musician whose lyre played the wind into weeping. Castor and Pollux, twin brothers who argued sweetly like sparrows, but fought like lions when the moment demanded it. Each one brought something quiet and rare. Some brought stories, others silence. Some brought old wounds. But Jason welcomed them all, not as soldiers, as companions. The ship grew alive with preparation, sails stitched under moonlight, ropes braided with silent prayers, and dried figs and honey wrapped in linen for the journey. Orpheus sang as he worked, his voice threading through the ship like sunlight in forest shade. Argo seemed to hum in harmony, her deck warm beneath their bare feet. Before they departed, Chiron came to the harbor. He walked beside Jason and placed something in his palm, a small, smooth stone. "For when you need to remember stillness," the centaur said. Jason closed his fingers around it. As dawn stretched across the water, the Argonauts gathered on deck. Jason stepped forward, one sandal still missing, his cloak wrapped loosely at his shoulders. He looked not like a prince, nor a hero, just a boy with a clear heart and a quiet purpose. He turned to his crew and spoke gently. "We sail not for conquest," he said, "but for truth, for wonder, for healing. If we find the fleece, let it be not our triumph, but our offering." The sail unfurled like a sigh. The wind caught it, soft and steady. Argo stirred beneath them, as though waking from a dream. As the ship left the shore, no horns were blown, no banners waved. Only the sea whispered beneath them, and the stars above blinked slowly in approval. Jason stood at the bow, hair stirred by salt wind, and listened. Deep within the ship, the timbers creaked, not in complaint, but in conversation. The ship was speaking to him, not in words, but in feeling. And as Argo slipped further from the land and deeper into the unknown, Jason felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child beneath Chiron's roof. He felt calm. The sea would test them. The world would bend. But for now, in the cradle of the ship that knew its name, the journey had begun in peace. And far away, in a distant land under moonlit towers, a girl named Medea dreamed of the sea. The sea had cradled Argo for days, her wooden bones rocking gently in rhythm with the tides. The wind was kind, and the sky wore a soft haze of lavender and blue. The Argonauts passed their time in quiet tasks, patching sails, sharing stories, humming old songs. Jason often stood at the bow, eyes half-lidded, letting the breeze speak to him in wordless lullabies. Then came the fog. It rolled in at dusk, thick as milk and soft as sleep, swallowing the horizon until sea and sky melted into one silver blur. Argo slowed without command. The crew grew hushed. Even the ever-cheerful Heracles frowned at the sudden silence. When the mist cleared at last, it revealed a sight so serene that even the war-hardened men blinked in disbelief. An island, pale and still, sat like a pearl upon the sea. Its shoreline shimmered with glassy stones, and the trees, tall and willowy, swayed, though no wind touched them. Flowers of strange hues bloomed on branches, not from the ground. Some drifted lazily mid-air, their petals turning slowly, like thoughts yet unspoken. Jason felt a warmth bloom in his chest. Not excitement, not fear, just peace. Deep and unquestioning. The kind of peace that makes you forget your name and why you were ever in a hurry. They anchored in the shallows, and one by one, the Argonauts stepped onto the island. The moment their feet touched the earth, they sighed. Not from exhaustion, but from something loosening inside them, memories unraveling like gentle threads. Atalanta wandered off without a word, drawn by butterflies with wings like stained glass. Castor and Pollux followed a trail of drifting feathers into a grove where the air tasted like honey. Even Heracles, who rarely stopped moving, stretched out on the grass and closed his eyes with a soft murmur. Jason walked deeper into the trees, the sunlight filtering down in gold-tinted shafts. Everything smelled of morning, dew, fresh bread, the air before the first bird sings. He couldn't remember what day it was, or how long they'd been at sea, or where they were going, but it didn't seem to matter. He came upon a pool, a perfect mirror, still and silent. When he looked in, he saw not his reflection, but a child. Himself, running barefoot through fields near Mount Pelion, laughing, free. He sat by the water and watched. And somewhere deep within the woods, Orpheus played his lyre, a soft, slow melody, notes like snowflakes drifting through time. The sound wove through the trees and into the minds of his crewmates, and slowly, like a distant bell ringing in a dream, it began to awaken something in them. Jason blinked. The image in the pool rippled. He stood, heart tugging. Something was wrong. Too soft. Too sweet. He reached into his satchel and clutched the smooth stone Chiron had given him. The moment his fingers closed around it, the spell cracked. He remembered. The fleece, the journey, the ship, his friends, lost in a waking slumber. He ran, through meadows of sleeping deer and statues that might once have breathed. He called their names. Atalanta, Heracles, Pollux. His voice shook the air. The sky dimmed slightly, as if the island were displeased. Orpheus felt it too. He changed the song. A single chord, sharp, yearning, ancient. It sliced through the enchantment like a blade of starlight. One by one, the Argonauts stirred. Heracles sat up, brow furrowed. Atalanta blinked, a butterfly landing softly on her cheek before vanishing. Even the trees seemed to sigh, their branches drooping as if in sadness. Jason gathered them near the beach. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Argus whispered, "How long were we here?" No one knew. Jason turned to Orpheus. "Play us home." So he did. A tune soft as goodbye, yet firm as the tide. Argo welcomed them back without a sound. As they pulled away from the shore, the mist returned, wrapping the island in silver silence once more. Jason stood at the stern, watching until the land disappeared. "We were never meant to stay," he said quietly. "Do you think it was real?" asked Atalanta. Jason didn't answer right away. He looked at the flower in her hair, one that still floated, petal by petal, without ever falling. "Yes," he finally said. "But so is the dream we follow." And that night, as the stars returned to their rightful places above them, Jason sat beneath the sail, the stone from Chiron still warm in his hand, and drifted into the kind of sleep that doesn't steal time, but gently returns it. The sea shimmered with pale gold as dawn broke across the horizon, casting a gentle hush over the deck of the Argo. The Argonauts moved quietly that morning, their hearts still heavy with the strange sweetness of the island they'd left behind. Jason, standing at the bow, watched as the sea slowly narrowed ahead of them, not into a strait or a gulf, but into something far more curious. A river. It should have been impossible. They were still in open waters, and yet the ocean parted and folded itself into a long, winding passageway, flanked by smooth obsidian cliffs and banks of silver reeds that swayed through there was no wind. The water here was not blue, but deep violet, and it sparkled faintly, as though lit from beneath by dreams. Orpheus stepped forward, his lyre resting gently in his arms. "This," he whispered, "is the river of waking dreams." Jason turned to him. You've heard of it. In a lullaby, Orpheus said, his voice soft as twilight. The river that carries dreams from sleeping minds into the stars. Sail through it, and you may see pieces of your soul. The crew grew still. Argo, as if understanding, drifted forward on her own. No oars were needed. No sails were raised. The river itself pulled them gently, like a mother drawing her child close. The air grew thick with silence, not heavy or fearful, but tender, like the pause between a breath and a heartbeat. Then the visions began. It started with Pollux, who stared into the water and gasped quietly. "That's my mother," he whispered, "when I was 5. She's braiding my hair just before I left." Castor leaned over beside him. "I see her too, but she's holding you, not me." Atalanta looked into the ripples and saw herself running through a forest, younger, faster, laughing with a sound she had forgotten. She turned away quickly, blinking back something that wasn't quite sadness. One by one, the Argonauts saw fragments of their lives, some joyful, others aching. Heracles saw a boy he once protected, long lost to time. Argus saw a wooden toy ship he had built with his father. And Orpheus saw a woman with hair like ink and eyes like nightfall, dancing in a field of stars. Jason sat alone at the edge of the deck, peering down into the violet water. The current slowed, and his reflection changed. He saw himself standing before a golden tree, a fleece glowing like moonlight draped over its branches. He reached for it, but his hands trembled. Behind him stood Peleus, crowned and cold, whispering lies. Around him stood the people of Iolcus, tired and hollow-eyed. Then came another vision, softer, stranger. A woman, draped in midnight blue, her eyes bright with something ancient. She stood barefoot by the sea, holding out a flame cupped in her hands. Jason took it, and the flame didn't burn. It hummed, and in it, he saw peace. Then her lips moved, though no sound came. Jason blinked. He knew that face. He'd never met her, but he knew her. Medea. The river curved ahead, narrowing now beneath arching trees with leaves like mirrors. A quiet unease began to stir as the crew fell silent. Some looked dazed, others teary-eyed. The visions were fading, but something lingered. Something deep and unseen had stirred in them. Jason stood and turned to his crew. "We've seen more than we understand," he said softly. "But the river doesn't show lies. It shows truths we've hidden, even from ourselves." "Why?" asked Argus, his voice a near whisper. "Why show us this?" Jason looked up toward the slowly brightening sky, so that when we face what lies ahead, we remember who we truly are. At that, Argo gave a soft creak beneath their feet, like the satisfied sigh of a ship that had carried its passengers through something invisible but profound. By nightfall, the river widened once more into open sea. The stars emerged above them, glittering like pinpricks in a velvet cloth. Orpheus played a lullaby so gentle that even the wind seemed to hush to listen. Jason sat near the mast, the vision of Medea still echoing in his chest like a name he hadn't yet learned how to say. And far across the sea, in a temple lit by candlelight, a young priestess opened her eyes. Medea had dreamed of a ship, of a boy with one sandal, and of a golden thread pulling both their lives quietly, inexorably, together. Colchis stood like a dream at the edge of the world, where rivers of fire whispered beneath the earth, and the sky always seemed to hold its breath. The palace of King Aeetes rose high above the cliffs, carved from black stone veined with gold. Its towers curved like talons, but the garden within bloomed with strange beauty. Night-scented lilies, silver-leafed vines, and moonflowers that only opened to silence. It was here, among shadow and incense, that Medea lived. She was the daughter of a king, and the niece of a sorceress feared by the gods themselves. But Medea was not made of cruelty. She was made of wind that stirs the candlelight, and the pause before a spell is spoken. Her hair fell in thick waves like woven dusk, and her hands always carried the scent of herbs, lavender, myrrh, something ancient. Her gaze could steady storms, but she rarely looked people in the eye. Not because she feared them, but because she saw too much. That night, she stood alone in the temple of Hecate, goddess of the crossroads. The flames in the braziers flickered low. She poured a circle of salt, scattered petals across the floor, and closed her eyes. In her dream, the ship came again. As always, it drifted through mist, quiet and solemn. Aboard stood the boy with one sandal, hair tousled, heart steady. He saw her, truly saw her, and unlike the others, priests, warriors, princes, he didn't try to claim her. He reached for something else, something softer. Medea woke before dawn. Her pulse trembled like a moth. The dream had returned too often to ignore. That same morning, Argo touched the shores of Colchis. Jason stood at the bow as the mist lifted. The city shimmered before him, its domes catching the first gold of the sun. He felt the pull in his chest again, the same quiet urgency he'd felt beside the river of waking dreams. King Aeetes welcomed them with sharp eyes and polite words. His court was rich with wine and ritual, but the warmth was hollow. Jason knew at once this was not a place of generosity. This was a place of tests. "You come for the Golden Fleece," Aeetes said, his voice rich and cold, "but it is not freely given." Jason bowed respectfully. "Then tell me what must be done." The king smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. 3 tasks. Complete them, and the fleece is yours. Fail, and the sea may remember you, but Colchis will not. Later, in the garden of the palace, Jason sat alone beneath a tree, heavy with silver fruit. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and smoke. He held the king's scroll in his hand, the list of trials. His brow was furrowed, his heart strangely quiet. "You are too calm for someone marked by death," a voice said. He turned. She stood by the tree, cloaked in midnight blue. A soft veil draped over her hair, and her hands held a bowl of herbs, still steaming. "I've seen you before," Jason said without thinking. She tilted her head. "Have you?" "In a dream." Medea's lips curved, not in amusement, but in something gentler. Recognition. "Then you know what I am." Jason nodded slowly. "You're the one the stars kept trying to show me." She stepped closer. The air around her shimmered faintly, as though warmed by invisible fire. "My father plays with fire he does not tend. These tasks are made to destroy you, but I can help." Jason searched her eyes. "Why?" "Because I've seen the fleece rot in that sacred tree," she said quietly. "And I've seen what greed does to men who chase symbols instead of healing. You want it not for conquest, but for restoration." Jason nodded. "I want to bring balance back to a kingdom that forgot how to be kind." For a moment, they stood in silence, two strangers who had met long before they spoke. Then Medea took his hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip steady. "You'll need my magic," she whispered. "But you'll also need to trust me, not just with your life, with your truth." Jason closed his fingers gently around hers. "Then let this be the beginning." That night, as the stars returned to their quiet vigil, Medea stood by the sacred altar and called upon the old magic, the language before language. In her chants were moonlight and shadow, bloodline and choice. She ground herbs into paste, stitched sigils onto Jason's tunic, and whispered words into the wind. From her own chest, she took a single thread of hair and tied it around his wrist. "A thread of fate," she murmured. "Not to bind you to me, but to remind you that you are not alone." Jason said nothing, but his eyes never left hers. As he walked away to face the trials that would either crown or undo him, Medea remained in the garden, the silver fruit swaying above her. And though the wind moved softly through the branches, it did not dare take that thread with it. Morning in Colchis rose not with birdsong, but with silence, thick and watchful. Clouds curled low over the palace, and the land held its breath as Jason stepped forward to face the first trial. The air was dry, crackling faintly as if it remembered flames that hadn't yet been lit. Medea watched from the shadows, veiled and still. She had given him everything she could. Her herbs, her spells, her silence. And now, he had only his heart to carry him through. The first task was to yoke the fire-breathing bulls, two massive beasts with bronze hides and glowing eyes, kept chained in a field of scorched earth. Their breath hissed smoke, and each movement sent sparks spiraling into the air. Jason stood before them, wearing the enchanted salve Medea had rubbed into his skin. "It will protect you from the fire," she had whispered, pressing her palm to his chest. "But only if you remain calm. Rage feeds flames. Stillness will silence them." He moved slowly, whispering the lullaby Chiron used to hum when the nights turned cold. As the bulls snorted and stomped, Jason kept his breath steady. Each step he took was firm and grounded. When the nearest bull lunged, jaws wide, Jason did not flinch. Instead, he bowed his head. The bull paused. For a breathless moment, the entire world seemed to hang. Then slowly, impossibly, the creature lowered its head too. Jason reached forward and slipped the yoke across its neck. The second bull followed, less with obedience, more with quiet recognition. Jason's stillness had become a mirror, and in it, the fury of fire found no fuel. From the garden terrace above, Aeetes frowned, but Medea's eyes shimmered with quiet pride. The second task came swiftly. Jason was led to a great field, dark and damp, where Aeetes gave him a pouch filled with dragon's teeth. "Sow these into the earth," the king said with a twisted grin, "and from them will rise your brothers." Jason knew the stories, teeth that birthed warriors, fierce and mindless, bound only to destroy. As he knelt to plant the teeth, he remembered Medea's words from the night before. "Do not fight the field. Confuse it." When the last tooth was buried, the ground trembled. Then, with bursts of soil and steam, armored warriors clawed their way from the earth, weapons in hand, eyes blank with rage. Jason backed away. Then, just as the first soldier lunged, he shouted, and he pointed behind them. The warriors paused, blades raised. Jason tossed a gleaming bronze helmet into their midst. "This is your true enemy," he cried. In their mindless state, the warriors turned on each other, confused, furious. They clashed, steel against steel, until only silence remained. Jason stood alone among shattered blades and drifting dust. The third and final trial was the most dangerous. Guarding the Golden Fleece was a colossal serpent, older than the palace, older than the king. Its coils wrapped around the sacred oak in the center of the palace grove, eyes glowing with a dim, eternal awareness. No sword could pierce its scales. No trick could lull its hunger. Medea met Jason at the gate to the grove. She handed him a vial of shimmering blue liquid. "This is dream root," she said softly. "It doesn't kill. It remembers sleep." She held his gaze. "You must not wake it again, not even in your heart." Jason nodded and stepped inside. The serpent was already watching him. He approached slowly, uncorking the vial and letting the scent drift into the air. As he moved, he hummed, low, gentle, the same melody Orpheus had once played on the deck of Argo. The serpent's tongue flicked. Its coils shifted, but the song wove between its thoughts, softening them like dusk over stone. Jason poured the liquid onto the roots of the sacred tree. The earth exhaled, The serpent's lids, heavy and slow, began to fall. And when it finally laid its head on the ground, Jason climbed the tree. There it was, the Golden Fleece. It shimmered not with arrogance, but with sorrow. As he touched it, a pulse of warmth flowed through his fingers. Not power, but memory. Fields once green, rivers once clean. A boy carrying his people's hopes like a lantern. He climbed down, holding the fleece close. When he stepped from the grove, the court of Colchis stood silent. Aeetes' face was thunder. But Medea smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of relief. Jason looked to her, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Not just trust, but something older, deeper, like two stars recognizing each other after lifetimes apart. But the silence didn't last. As they turned to leave, the sky cracked with sudden thunder, and the fleece began to glow too brightly. Jason clutched it tighter. Medea's smile faded. A storm was waking, not just in the sky, but in the sea, and in the hearts of those who would not let go of what should never have been claimed. And far below the palace, the earth stirred. Something sacred had been taken, and it would not sleep again. The sea turned restless the moment Jason stepped onto Argo with the Golden Fleece in his arms. Waves that once rocked the ship like a cradle now rolled with uneasy rhythm. The clouds above Colchis thickened, not with rain, but with a heaviness that pressed on the skin. Even the air seemed to hum, low and mournful, like a song remembering a sorrow. The fleece glowed softly under the canvas sail, golden strands rippling with a light that wasn't from this world. The Argonauts gathered around it in reverent silence. Some wept without knowing why. Others knelt as though in the presence of a lost god. Jason wrapped it in linen and set it gently at the heart of the ship. He should have felt triumphant, victorious at the end of his quest. But all he felt was quiet. And Medea stood at the edge of the deck, her eyes fixed not on the fleece, but on the horizon. They were leaving Colchis behind. She had betrayed her father, her house, and the land of her birth. But there was no regret in her expression, only a sorrow that clung to her like mist. At twilight, the first storm struck. The sky cracked open without warning. Lightning tore across the clouds in spirals. The sea surged, rising higher than the mast. Argo bucked against the current like a living thing in pain. The wind screamed. Jason and his crew scrambled to hold the sails, to tie down the rigging. Rain pelted them, sharp as needles. Orpheus tried to play, to calm the storm, but his lyre strings snapped. Then, without speaking, Medea stepped to the center of the ship. The fleece pulsed brighter. Jason turned to her, soaked to the bone. "What's happening? This isn't just a storm." Medea didn't answer right away. She knelt beside the fleece, placed her hand upon it, and closed her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but quiet, too quiet for comfort. "I lied," she said. Jason's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I knew what the fleece would do. I knew it wouldn't be given without consequence." Her eyes stayed closed. "The fleece was never meant to be taken. It is bound to the land it protects. When it is removed, balance begins to collapse." Jason stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She opened her eyes, and in them was no deceit, only ache. "Because I hoped that love might be stronger than prophecy. That if you held it, the curse might sleep. That your reason for taking it, so pure, so quiet, might break the pattern." Jason turned away, running a hand through his drenched hair. "And now the sea will not let us pass without suffering." The wind shrieked louder. A wave slammed over the side of the ship, dragging 2 crewmen off their feet. The fleece, still glowing, pulsed again, brighter, sharper. Then Argo did something strange. She groaned, not in protest, but in grief. The wood beneath their feet thrummed with sorrow. The ship was weeping. Jason dropped to his knees, pressing his palm against the deck. "She's alive. She feels it." Medea knelt beside him, trembling. "She was carved from the sacred forest, the same trees that once whispered to the fleece. She knows what we've done." The storm pressed harder. Castor shouted that the sail was tearing. Heracles struggled to hold the rudder straight. Medea turned to Jason, rain streaking her cheeks. "There's only one way." He looked at her, searching. "What way?" "We must bind the fleece to us. Not just carry it, but choose it. Accept its curse as part of ourselves. Only then will it stop fighting." Jason hesitated. "If we do that, we carry its burden forever," Medea said softly. "It will never belong to the world again, only to us." The crew gathered in a circle around them, battered, soaked, but listening. Jason looked at each of them, then to Medea, then to the fleece, now pulsing like a heart between them. He reached out, took Medea's hand, and placed it on the fleece beside his. "I choose it," he whispered, "and I choose you." Medea looked at him, startled. "Even after I lied?" "You told the truth that mattered," he said. "You stayed." She closed her eyes. Together, they spoke the ancient binding words. Ones Medea had only read in fragments, stitched together from the roots of old chants. The sea stilled for a breath. The fleece flared, gold and white and blue, and then dimmed. The storm began to ease. The rain softened. The waves lowered. The wind fell into a hush. And Argo settled. The ship no longer wept. The Argonauts exhaled as one, a sound like the breaking of a spell. Jason stood and looked toward the fading thunderclouds. "The fleece no longer fights us," he murmured. "No," Medea said. rising beside him. Because it has chosen to. That night, no one slept. They sat in silence, wrapped in blankets and memory. The fleece rested in the center of the deck, no longer glowing, but warm, almost breathing. Jason sat beside it, Medea leaning against his shoulder. He still didn't know what price they would pay for what they had done. But he knew now that love was not a solution. It was a vow. And sometimes, vows had to be made in the heart of the storm. The sea was quiet now, almost unnaturally so. No gulls cried above them. No wind stirred the sail. Argo drifted forward not by force, but by some slow, invisible thread that pulled them through water as still as sleep. It was as if the storm had taken all the noise in the world with it. Jason sat at the helm, hands resting on the polished wood, watching the horizon stretch ahead, blank and pale, like a page not yet written. The Golden Fleece no longer shimmered. It rested beneath linen folds at the heart of the ship, warm to the touch, but silent. It had stopped glowing when they bound it, when he and Medea accepted its burden. Yet something within it had changed. It no longer felt like an artifact. It felt like a presence, listening, dreaming, breathing alongside them. The crew had grown quieter too. Orpheus rarely sang. His fingers danced silently over the strings of his lyre. But no sound came. Atalanta spent hours at the bow, eyes fixed on a sea that refused to ripple. Even Heracles, who once filled the deck with laughter and stories, now moved with quiet caution, as if speaking too loudly might wake something best left asleep. It was Medea who noticed it first. One morning, she looked up from her herbs and whispered, "The stars haven't moved." Jason followed her gaze. It was true. For 3 nights, the constellations above them had remained exactly the same. No drift, no arc across the sky. The moon hung in place like a pearl suspended by invisible threads. "We're no longer moving through the world," Medea said. "We've crossed into the in-between." Jason frowned. "You mean a spell?" She shook her head slowly. "No, a passage." That night, the crew gathered beneath the mast. The stars above them burned cold and unmoving. Even Argo was still, so still it no longer creaked or sighed. It felt like the breath of the ship itself had paused. Jason turned to Medea. "If this is a passage, then where are we going?" Medea ran her fingers along the rim of a clay bowl filled with seawater. The surface did not ripple. "This is the place between choices," she said. "The voyage that never gets recorded in poems. The part of the story no bard sings, where hearts are measured, not by deeds, but by silence." Jason looked around the deck. Each of his companions carried weight now, not just from the trials of Colchis or the storm, but something deeper. They had seen their dreams in the river. They had stood in the presence of an ancient power. And now they were being asked to carry on without clear direction. One by one, the crew began to drift into sleep. Pollux first, then Argus, then even Orpheus, who curled beside his silent lyre. The air grew thick with stillness, and the stars seemed to dim, just slightly, like eyes beginning to close. Jason remained awake. So did Medea. They took turns at the helm, even though the ship no longer moved by oar or wind. They told each other stories, not of their quests or fears, but of small things. Jason told her about the tree behind Chiron's cave, where he used to lie and listen to the wind hum through the branches. Medea told him about her childhood garden, where the flowers only bloomed under moonlight, and how she used to hum spells just to hear her own voice in the quiet. In those moments, something unspoken passed between them, stronger than charm, quieter than love, a shared knowing that they had left behind the world of heroes and entered the space where only truth remained. On the fourth night, Jason dreamed. He was back in Iolcus, standing before a crowd. He held the fleece high above his head, and the people knelt in joy. But when he looked closer, their eyes were hollow, their faces blurred. The fleece in his hands had turned to ash. He woke with a start. Medea was already sitting beside him, watching the stars. "Did you dream of home?" she asked softly. Jason nodded. "I don't know if I want to go back," he said. "Not as I was. Not as who they expect me to be." Medea looked down. "You won't be that man. You can't." Jason met her gaze. "And you? Will you stay with me? If I'm no king, if I return not as a savior, but simply as a man who tried." She was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. "I didn't leave Colchis for a crown," she whispered. "I left for the one who knew the sound of silence and still chose to listen." Jason exhaled. Just then, Argo stirred. The faintest creak. The stars above blinked. A breeze touched the sail, so soft it could have been mistaken for a sigh. The spell had shifted. The passage was ending. The sea began to ripple. And for the first time in days, the moon moved. Jason looked out over the water and saw land, far, pale, unfamiliar. It was not Iolcus, not yet, but the voyage was no longer paused. The dream was fading, and the world was waiting, not for a hero, but for the ones who returned changed. The sea opened wide and gentle as Argo neared Iolcus. The skies were pale and cloud-strewn, the wind quiet as breath. No drums welcomed their return, no horns, only the hush of the shore and the distant call of gulls circling above the cliffs. It was not the return Jason had imagined as a boy, dreaming beneath the trees of Mount Pelion. He stood at the bow of Argo, the golden fleece now wrapped carefully in layers of linen and silence, resting beside him. Medea stood at his side, her veil lowered, her eyes steady. They had not spoken much since leaving the realm between worlds, but in their quiet there was no distance, only understanding. Behind them, the Argonauts stirred slowly, worn by the journey, humbled by the stillness they had passed through. Each man and woman who had once stepped aboard the Argo had been marked by the voyage in a way that no bard could fully sing. They no longer wore their strength with pride, but with tenderness. They knew now that survival was not a conquest, but a choice, made again and again in silence. Iolcus had not changed much. The towers still rose like thorns from the hill. The palace gates were still carved with the lions of old. But the people had changed. Jason could see it in their faces as he walked through the streets, worn, uncertain, watching him not as a savior, but as something unfamiliar. At the palace, King Peleus awaited. He sat upon the throne in robes too fine for his aging frame. His crown shimmered, but his eyes were sharp and clouded with suspicion. "So," he said, "you return." Jason stepped forward, calm and unarmed. "I've brought the fleece." He unwrapped it slowly, revealing the golden strands. The light did not blaze. It glowed gently, as if tamed, no longer demanding awe, but offering peace. Peleus stood, hunger gleaming faintly in his gaze. "Then I will take it," he said, stepping down. Jason shook his head. "No." The court gasped. Peleus paused. "You dare—" "I did not bring it to place upon your shoulders," Jason said. "I did not endure the sea, the fire, the silence, so it could rot in a hall like this." His voice did not rise. It stayed soft, like a lullaby spoken beside a bed. "This fleece is not a prize. It's a promise. To heal, to remember, to begin again." Peleus narrowed his eyes. "Then what do you propose?" Jason turned to the court. "I will not be king," he said. "Not because I do not love this land, but because I will not chain it to a crown. I offer the fleece, not to the throne, but to the earth." He walked into the courtyard beyond the palace and knelt in the soil where weeds had overgrown the sacred grove. With his bare hands, he dug into the dirt and planted the fleece as one would a seed. The people watched in silence, and then, slowly, softly, the earth responded. From the fleece grew slender roots of light. They spread into the soil like threads of gold. Shoots of new life broke through the ground. Golden saplings, their leaves glittering in the morning sun. A hush fell across the city. Children knelt near the glowing trees. Elders reached out and touched the leaves, their fingers trembling. A warmth spread through Iolcus, not heat, but memory, of stories passed down, of love lost and found, of the soft hands of mothers and the steady hearts of fathers. Peleus said nothing. He returned to his hall, not defeated, but faded, like the final note of a song no longer needed. Jason turned to his companions. Some remained. Others had already begun to drift toward home. To Heracles he offered a clasp on the shoulder. The world will call for your strength again. To Orpheus, he said, your song is needed in places still wrapped in silence. To Atalanta, he gave only a smile, and she nodded, knowing that some paths are better walked alone. Jason and Medea left Iolcus quietly, without ceremony. They traveled by foot for days, carrying little but memory. They found a quiet valley where golden light poured through the trees and the air smelled of thyme and spring water. There they built a small cottage near a stream that whispered through the rocks. Jason tended the garden. Medea brewed tea with herbs that sang when the moon was full. On some nights, they spoke little. On others, they lay under the stars and whispered dreams they hadn't spoken even to themselves. The fleece remained in Iolcus, rooted, growing, no longer gold, but green, its gift transformed. And the people, over time, stopped calling Jason hero. They called him something gentler. The man who brought peace and walked away. And though no crown touched his head, the land bloomed in his wake. Not because of what he conquered, but because of what he chose not to claim. Years passed softly. In the quiet valley, far from the sea, time no longer rushed or roared. It drifted, gentle as a river at dusk, warm as bread just out of the oven. Here, Jason and Medea made a home, not with riches or power, but with silence and soil. The kind of home that grows around you like moss, slow, comforting, full of breath. Their cottage was small and curved like a shell, built with wood that still remembered the forest. Vines crept lovingly across the roof, and bees hummed like lullabies in the lavender bushes out front. Inside, shelves bowed under jars of herbs and stories, dried thyme and sea salt, pressed petals and bits of parchment with half-written thoughts. Jason took to the garden like it was a new kind of voyage. He grew figs and wild mint and learned how to listen to the ground, not for commands, but for signs. When to water, when to rest, when to simply sit beside it and say nothing at all. Medea taught the nearby children how to read stars and speak to owls. She showed them how to make tea that calmed shaking hands and salves that softened old scars. But mostly, she taught them the magic of paying attention to the silence in a room, the way people say goodbye with their eyes, the way the moon sometimes seems to follow you home. Some nights, Jason would lie awake with the window open, staring at the stars. They had changed. Or perhaps he had. They no longer felt like distant fires. They felt close, familiar, as though they had followed him home. And maybe they had. After all, they had watched him since boyhood, listened as he whispered dreams into their light, waited as he sailed into myth and returned not as legend, but as something far rarer, whole. One evening, as twilight pulled its shawl over the hills, a knock came at the door. It was a young traveler, weary and barefoot. In his hand he carried a scroll with golden ribbon and a look in his eyes that said, "I've heard of you." He bowed. "Are you Jason, the one who found the Golden Fleece?" Jason smiled, brushing soil from his hands. "Once, perhaps." "Then, why are you not king?" the boy asked. Jason paused, then stepped aside to let him in. "I gave the crown to someone who needed it," he said, "and I kept the peace." The boy blinked. "And the fleece?" Jason pointed out the window toward the distance, toward Iolcus, where golden trees still glowed under the sun. "Planted it," he said. "It's grown into something better." That night, the boy stayed for dinner, simple stew and honeyed bread. Medea read aloud from an old scroll while the wind rustled gently through the herbs hanging from the rafters. And when the stars came out, Jason led the boy outside and showed him the constellations. He pointed to one shaped like a ship. "That's Argo," he said. "She sailed you across the world," the boy whispered. Jason nodded. "And then she brought me home." Later, after the boy had drifted to sleep beside the hearth, Jason stood in the doorway, looking up. The stars were as they had always been. But now, he saw them not as a map to chase, but as companions, old, constant, steady. Medea came to stand beside him, her head against his shoulder. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The sea, the journey." He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said, "because the truest part of it came home with me." She smiled and closed her eyes. And the stars, as if hearing, shimmered just a little closer. Far away, the fleece still grew in the soil of Iolcus, now a grove where people came not to conquer, but to rest. Children played beneath golden leaves. Elders sat in its shade and remembered. Travelers touched its branches and felt the quiet of something sacred. And the story of Jason and the Argonauts was told, not with the roar of battle, but with the hush of wonder, of a boy who dreamed beneath the stars, of a ship that knew his name, of a woman who walked through shadow and chose love, and of a journey that did not end in glory, but in peace, a peace that stayed.